Okay, guys, we're in the home stretch here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and we're going to do one last edit here. Um, like I said, it's going to be um, a little bit more involved. But you'll notice a lot of the methods that I use and the workflow that I use is pretty much going to be the same. I'm going to close these two out. So no, close this one out. I'm going to go back to Lightroom here, and I'm going to grab this one. And again, once it loads here, I'm going to hit Control or Command E to send it over to Photoshop. Now, this one we shot it on a cloudy day. Usually when I shoot outdoors, if I can, I know I get a lot of back and forth when it comes to shooting in natural light or shooting with speed lights or flashes or anything like that. I have a tendency to shoot with speed lights if I'm outdoors, or use reflectors or some kind of light modification. Reason being is sometimes when you shoot, especially when you're shooting portraits, I'm real big on things like really seeing the eyes and getting some light and some life in the eyes and things like that. So I'll have a tendency to shoot a little bit more in a controlled lighting situation, even if it's outdoors. Obviously, if I'm in a studio, I have full control over the light, but I can have some control over the light outside of a studio. Like I said, whether it's using speed lights and reflectors, I've bounced speed lights off of reflectors, so you can do all kinds of creative things. And maybe at some point what I'll do is I'll do a standalone, not necessarily a live thing, but I'll do a standalone on some lighting techniques and post that. But in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start working on this. And again, I'm starting off with my shot straight out of the camera. I shot this on a D7100. I think I actually shot this at about f8 or f10. One of the questions I got, because I shot at such a kind of a high aperture, or more opened aperture, was how I managed to get my background, get depth of field in the background. And basically what I did was I stepped pretty far back and I zoomed in so it compresses the background a little bit, and kind of gives you that that little bit of extra depth of field. Now in the editing process here, this particular model is in her late 20s. So again, life happens. So there's a little bit more touch-up that's going to go on here. And again, I'm not going to do the most perfect job in the world, but I'm definitely going to let you guys know the best way to handle some of this stuff. So you can see, and generally what I'll do is I'll just kind of look over everything that I've got going on here. And again, I'll zoom into her face a little bit more, since that's where the majority of my editing is going to be happening. So as I zoom in, you can kind of see, some of the challenges that I'm going to have. She's got a little scar right here, another one right here, and then just some blemishes and some uneven skin, things like that. So in this case, I'm going to pretty much go with the same method that I went before, except probably working a little bit more. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go here, I'm going to grab my new layer. This is going to be my touch-up layer, so I'm going to go touch-up. Okay, and for this right now, I'm going to use my spot healing brush tool, and I'm going to try to talk as much as I can, but I'm going to really move through this so you can kind of see in more or less in real time exactly how quickly you can kind of get in here and really start working this stuff. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to take out some of this, more of this uneven skin down here by her. She smiles a lot, so she's got a few little things like I can grab this. Now, if I'm working with lines, like what I just did right there, and then the little crease here by her nose, I'll draw out, because like I had mentioned before, usually you just can tap over like small blemishes and stuff like that. However, if I'm working in larger areas, I still work in small increments, but will still use smaller brush strokes and everything like that, just to kind of get rid of those things that kind of stand out like that. So again, when you're touching up, you know, you don't want to, like if you can see here, I've got this long piece of hair that's coming down, and generally I won't do something like that because it could wreak a little bit of havoc, and actually that turned out a little bit better than I thought it was going to. Grab that a little bit. So I can come in here and I can just start, you know, touching this stuff out. And this is where you do want to have a bit of a critical eye, just to make sure that you can kind of tone some of this stuff down. Get rid of this scar. She had chicken pox, so she's a little self-conscious about some of these scars and stuff. So you want to kind of take care of that stuff. Now, again, you know, people are people, and they're going to have things and stuff like that. I've worked with this particular model several times, and you can see she's got a small beauty mark by her eye here. And it's something I would never take out because it's a part of who she is, unless she looked at me and went, "Could you please take that out?" So in the several times that I have worked with her, I've always kept that in. And you can see on this scar, this vertical scar, that I'm just doing it in small little increments to get it out. And again, I'll back out just a touch. Control minus will take me out. Get her centered up. There's my before. There's my before. There's my after. I can see a few little places down here that I am going to quickly work on. Now, a lot of the stuff too I can take care of with dodging and burning. So, like again, she's kind of got some dark circles under her eyes a little bit. So I want to go ahead and I want to take those out, but I'm not going to do it. I'm going to do it by dodging and burning. A little bit more on her nose here, a couple more things, and like I said, you can get very, very critical with this. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that. So there's my before, there's my after, and you can see it's still quite a bit of difference. And again, non-destructive. I'm working on my own layer here, or it's working on its own layer here. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to do a dodge and burn layer, and I'm going to see about getting rid of, and this is going to be doing some dodging, bringing some light into her, just these dark areas under her eyes. So again, I come down to my new layer icon, and we're going to call this dodge. Now, you guys might find that I'm incorrect on this because I always get confused with the dodging and burning terms. I don't know why. I'm not the only one. There's a lot of photographers out there who have done darkroom work and everything, and they always confuse dodging and burning. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to lighten up under her eyes. So again, I add my new layer. In this case, I'm going to name it Dodge, even if it's wrong. I'm going to fill it with 50% gray. Go over here to my blending mode. Soft light, so I can make that gray transparent. Now I'm going to color with white. I'm going to grab my brush, my paintbrush, take my opacity down to about 20%, take my flow down to around 35-40%. Okay, I'm going to increase my brush size, and I'm just going to start working under her eyes here. And again, this is a very, very subtle thing, and you don't want to overdo it, because if you overdo it, then it's just going to look like she's kind of a raccoon. So you want to be very, very selective when you do this. Very careful. Okay, and again, I can lighten some of these areas, like right in here by her nose, kind of soften up that crease a little bit. Keep in mind, and this will become a little bit more apparent when we get down to the softening of this particular photo, is that there's certain details that you want to keep. I see a lot of photos like on Facebook and stuff, and people will quote unquote soften, and the problem with that is they end up softening their whole face, and it just looks like it's an out of focus shot. So you kind of want to avoid that. So I'm going to bring a little bit more out under her lip here. Just like so. Just kind of soften up that line a little bit there. And then if I need to, I can grab my erase tool. I'm getting a little bit of over here that I don't want. Go back to my brush tool. So you can see how this can kind of take its time. So here's a before, here's an after. Okay, so before, after. And again, if I feel like it's a little too much, I can grab my opacity slider and just back off a little bit. Maybe right about there. Always check your work as you go along. Don't build a bunch of stuff and then go, okay, this is my before, this is my after. Check it as you build it to make sure everything is making sense to you. Okay? So the next thing I want to do, I've got my touch-up out of the way. I've got my little bit of dodging and burning out of the way. Now I'm going to start working on individual aspects of this particular shot. I usually like to work with starting with the eyes. I can get in here and I clean up the whites of these eyes, and there's several different methods to do that. Again, you can use dodging and burning to do that. You can use the clone stamp tool to do that. It's kind of micro work when you kind of get in there to do that. Again, keep in mind, eyes are not pure white, so don't grab a white paintbrush and start painting things out, because it's just not going to look natural. In this case, though, what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to start bringing her eye color out a little bit more. She's got very, very pretty blue eyes, so I want to bring those out. So I'm going to grab an adjustment layer. I'm going to call it eye color. And again, keeping in mind that you got to kind of train yourself to see what you're going to be affecting. In this case, even though when I make this adjustment, it's going to make it overall, I'm concentrating on her eyes and how I want them to look. So I'm going to grab my slider over here on the right, and I'm going to bring out the color in her eyes. Add a little bit of contrast. Now, in this levels section here, if you look at the very right arrow or triangle down here, these are all of your white levels. The black on the left-hand side are your black levels, and this middle triangle, those are your mid-tones. So again, I'm looking at her eyes. I like the color, so I'm going to grab my mask by selecting on it. Again, 4 corners on the mask. And now I'm going to invert that mask, Control I, because I want to hide everything. Okay. Then, usually I ask my class this, but since this is kind of a one-sided conversation, so then in your heads you should be coloring with white. Grab my paintbrush. Now, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more to her eyes, so I can really kind of see, because if you notice, people do have a slight black ring around the edge of their eye, and you don't want these things to start kind of merging into each other. So you want to kind of keep these things a little bit separate. So I'm going to use a smaller brush, and I'm going to grab here. I'm going to increase my opacity, increase my flow, and you can see that I'm just grabbing the iris, the blue of her eyes, and grab the other side here. And I'm going to show you guys a little, kind of a little cool technique just to kind of help to make them pop just a little bit more. Okay, so now here's my after, there's my before, there's my after. Now I am in pretty close, so I'm going to zoom all the way out, Control or Command 0. And again, I'm going to review it. There's my after, there's my before, there's my after. Probably a little too much. So I'm going to grab my opacity, take that down just a little bit, make sure they pop still for me. Okay, and actually what I was going to show you, and I'm not going to because once I did that it kind of made things a little bit better. As I mentioned, you have this dark ring around your eye. What you can do if you want to get these to pop just a little bit more is you can add another layer here, and I'll show you. I'll just add another layer. I'll grab my paintbrush. I'll grab black as my color, so I'm over here in my color swatches. Get select my brush, get a really small brush, just enough to cover that. And again, I'm doing this at 100%, but I don't have to. So I'm just going to go ahead and I am going to just outline her eye. Now you can see that's pretty dark and it's pretty extreme and everything like that. So I don't want it quite that much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my blending mode to get that to blend in a little bit more. It'll make it look a little bit more natural. So I'm going to go from normal to soft light. Now soft light is a blending mode I use a lot. Okay. And then what I might need to do is I might need to take and drop my opacity down just a little bit. And then the other thing that I can do to kind of help settle that down just a touch is I can come over here to my filter menu, go down to blur, Gaussian blur, and you can see there's my my black line there. And depending on the size of your picture, I can go ahead and just soften that up just a touch. So let that go. So there's my before. There's my after. Very subtle. Very subtle. But in the big scheme of things, it'll just kind of make her eye pop just a little bit more. So you can kind of see the difference between her if you're facing the picture, her right eye and her left eye. Just a little bit more of a pop there. So I can either choose to keep that or not. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and turn that off so we're consistent here. Actually, I'm just going to go ahead and throw away that layer. Okay. So now what I want to do is I'm going to work on bringing out her eye makeup just a little bit. So again, zoom in, bring it into her eyes, and I want to get a little bit more contrasty. Again, I want it to pop a little bit more. So I'm going to use a levels layer, and I'm going to call this eye makeup. And I'm going to, because I want to make it darker, I'm going to work from the left end over here. So you can see, oops, that's probably a little too much. I'm going to just adjust my blacks a little bit to kind of get that to stand out a little bit more. And again, this particular adjustment, again, it's over the whole shot. So again, I want to invert my layer mask from white to black. Grab my paintbrush, and I'm going to, I'm going to be coloring in white. Just making sure that's selected. I want that. Paintbrush, white. And I'm going to just, again, very carefully start coming in here. And again, these are very subtle things. Unless my intention, I'll get in here on her waterline just a bit. Again, these things are to taste. If I was doing something a little bit more extreme, then I would probably make it a little bit darker and stand out a little bit more. So again, you kind of keep it consistent with what you're trying to accomplish. Just touch on these little eyelashes down here, help bring those out just a touch. Now you can kind of see, and again, something that takes a little bit more time, but I will mention it. You can kind of see her waterline for her eyeliner down here. It's a little washed out, mostly because of the tears that your eyes produce and everything. So what I could actually do is I could do the same thing I did with the eye. I can come in here with a black brush and I can complete that line. Use a blending mode like soft light to kind of soften it up, but again, just to kind of help bring those out just a little bit. So again, here's my before and my after. And very, very subtle. I'm going to bring out her eyeshadow just a little bit here. So make my brush a little bit bigger. And if I still want to make it pop just a hair more, what I can do, and I'll show you here in just a second, a little bit smaller. So if I want to make that stand out a little bit more, so here's my before, here's my after. Pretty subtle stuff going on here. So if I want to, what I can do is I can say, I want that a little bit darker. So I can come over here and I can keep adjusting a little bit more. So you can see if I go real extreme. But again, going kind of subtle here. Going kind of subtle with my midtones here. And again, I'll back off to 100%. And before, after, before, and after. Okay. Now, if I want to get an overall estimate of what I'm doing here, again, I go back to my background layer, hold down my Alt or Option key, click on the eyeball, and there's before, and there's after. So, again, I'm not fixing mistakes. I'm taking and I'm just enhancing certain things. Okay. So now I'm going to come down here and let's do her lipstick. Okay. Just want to get it to pop a little bit more, maybe make it just a touch more red. Now, if you remember that keyboard shortcut that I told you guys about earlier, the Alt, Control, Shift, and E, or on the Mac it'd be Option, Command, Shift, and E. I'm going to perform that now. And again, everything has jumped up to one layer. Now, there's a reason that I'm doing this, which I'll explain here in just a second. We're going to make a mask over her lips here. Okay, but we're going to use a quick mask. So on my keyboard, I just hit the letter Q. And what will happen over here, if you look on the left side, right under my color palette, you're going to see this little square right here. And if I hit Q again, you'll see how it kind of grayed out, and if I hit it again, you kind of see how it's highlighted. I want it highlighted. It automatically changes to black and white up here. So what I want to do is I'm going to take my brush, and you're going to see that when I start doing this over her lips, it's going to give me kind of this pink, reddish pink sort of look here. What I'm actually doing is I'm actually drawing my mask onto her lips. Okay, so the idea behind this is whatever is, and it's kind of that same concept, whatever is filled in is going to be protected. Okay, So again, whatever's filled in is going to be your masked area. Now in this case, we do something just a little bit different. I'm doing this kind of quick. So when I hit Q again, it gives you an outline. Okay. Now, the way that this mask originally works, when you paint it, everything inside of the marching ants is protected. Okay. Everything on the outside is not protected. So if I were to make any kind of an adjustment on this, or paint or anything like that, it would happen on the outside of her lips. Well, I don't want to do that. I want to make sure to be on the inside of her lips. So I need to invert this mask. This is the one time that it's not Control I, it's actually Control Shift I. Okay, and it inverses as opposed to inverts. I don't know why they did it that way. Not sure. So now basically everything outside this selection is protected. Everything inside this selection will be affected by what I'm going to do. Okay, so I'm going to come over here to my adjustment layers on the right hand side here. I'm going to click on curves. Now if you remember when I mentioned curves a little bit earlier, that I can start affecting each channel individually. So what I want to do is I want to bring some more red out in her lips. So what I'll do is I'll go over here to the red channel. So click on the down arrow, click on the red channel, grab it from about the middle here, and I'll start cranking up that red. And you can see her lips getting a little bit more red. Now I want them red, so what I need to do is I need to back off on my green. So I go to my green channel, again about center, pull back on my green just a little bit, go to my blue channel, take some of the blue out, and by moving it down, I'm taking that color out. So now you can see she's a little bit more pure red when it comes to the color of her lips. Okay, again, might be a little too much. I'll name this adjustment layer Lips. Lips. Okay, and again, I'll take that layer mask and I'll drop the opacity just a touch. So I just want them a slight subtle change in color. So there's my after, there's my before, there's my after, oops, my before. So you can see just, again, I'm just kind of making things pop. So you can kind of see her lips in there. There's before, there's after. If I hold down my Alt key, click on my background layer, there's my before, there's my after. Okay, so you can see how I'm building this up. And again, when it comes down to it, absolutely no damage to my original picture. So now the next thing I'm going to do is I am going to do one of my skin softening techniques. And I'm going to show you probably the easier skin softening technique of the two. Now keep in mind, before I do this, I'm going to kind of zoom in here just a little bit. So on any person, I'm going to zoom in here quite a bit, but you can see there's pores and there's texture in her skin. Okay, what a lot of people are going to have a tendency to do, and again, I'm going to do that Control Alt Shift E to jump my layers up again. So I've got a composite layer here. But what a lot of people will end up doing is they'll just come over here and they'll grab, like, they'll go into their blur filter and they'll grab like a smart blur or something like that. I've seen some people grab a Gaussian blur and they'll just take that, and you can see right there what it's doing. It's just completely blurred out her skin. There's no texture, there's no detail, there's nothing. It's just blur, and it looks like just blur. Again, it gives you that look of having an out of focus picture. It's the last thing that you want. So you want to be real selective on how you do this. Okay, so I just canceled that out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to my my composite layer, and this method actually uses a filter that's generally used for sharpening, except I'm going to use it in a slightly different way. I'm going to actually use it to soften. Okay, so once your layer is selected, you're going to come up here under your filter menu. You're going to go down to Other, and then you're going to come down here to High Pass. I'm going to click on that. And again, I'm going to do this pretty extreme because I want you guys to see the difference, really see the difference in what I'm doing here. So generally, depending on the type of skin a person has, is going to depend on how much of this I use. In this case, like I said, I'm going to go pretty high. So I'm going to take this up to about around 30-ish. Okay. And then you can see it's pushing a lot of my image through. Okay. If I go down here, it's pushing less and less of my image through. Okay. So that's pretty subtle. I'm going to do this kind of extreme. So I'm going to, like I said, keep it up around 30-ish. So you can see a lot of it's come through. So that's my high pass filter. Okay. Generally, again, I would probably set that between, say, 15 and maybe 23, 24, maybe. So kind of keep that in mind. And if somebody has more porous skin, you can maybe do it just a little bit more. If not, then you can kind of keep it a little bit more subtle. So now what I'm going to do is now I want to change the blending mode on this. Okay, so I'm going to come up here to my blending mode. And again, I'm using soft light. Again, one of any photographer's favorite ones, I think. So if you look at this now, if I show you the before and after, you're going to see that I've got real sharp edges. So here's before. Okay, you can kind of see how it's kind of softened up. And then here's after adding that high pass filter. So you can see I've got real sharp edges and everything. And I'm seeing a lot more of the texture in her skin and a lot more of the kind of the roughness. She'd hate me if she heard me say that. But, just so basically I want to keep this texture, but I want to soften her up a little bit. So what I'm going to do, obviously the opposite of sharpening is softening. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to invert this layer, okay? Don't have to add a layer mask yet. But right now I can take and I can hit Control-I or Command-I on a Mac, and you'll see how it softened everything up, okay? You can see it just, again, almost like the blur that using the Gaussian blur. The difference that you're going to see here is when I zoom in here, you're still going to be seeing some of the texture in her skin. Now, again, I did this at a very extreme rate, so you guys could really see the difference. Generally, I wouldn't do it this high, so you'd see a lot more texture. And again, what I can do is I can drop my opacity, and I'll do that now. Just drop my opacity a bit, so it softens up her skin, but you can still see the texture. Now, the problem that I have here, and I'm going to go back up to 100% for a moment. The problem that I have here is now I'm losing all the detail in her eyes, her eyeliner. I'm losing the detail in her lips, even the detail in her nose. These are all the things that make a person are these details. And a lot of what I see when people soften is they get rid of these details and it looks very unnatural. Okay, so the way to get that back, I can do one of two things here. Okay, I'm going to add a layer mask. So I'm going to come down here into my layers panel, a little square with a circle in it, click on it once. There we go. And I have an all revealing or all white layer mask. Okay, one of the things that I can go in here and do is I can grab a brush and I want to cover up some things. So in other words, I don't want this softness to be in her eyes, for instance. Okay, I want her eyes nice and sharp so I can see them. Okay, so I'll paint with black. So again, opposite of punching holes through it, now I'm covering holes up. So I'm going to come in here and I am going to get the detail back in her eyes. I want to get the detail back in her eyeshadow, that lower lid, those lower lashes, in her eyebrow a little bit here. I'm going to grab her other eye. I'm going to do the same thing. Again, I am making sure that none of her eye or none of the lines or details that make her eye up are going to stay softened. Okay. Now, same down here with her lips. Again, I'm going to follow the line of her lips, and I am going to bring all of this back. So basically what that's doing is that's bringing it back to the state that I had it when I first started this process. And then what I'll do is around her nose is I'll start coming in and I'll bring just around the edges. Again, kind of bringing that detail back that defines the face. Okay, so up around here. Okay, then what I might want to do is come a little bit down here by her jawline. Bring back, again, just subtly bring back some of that jawline. Because a face, like I said, it's all about detail, and faces do have detail. So I'm going to come all the way up here with her jawline. So what I'm doing in these areas, as you can see, is I'm taking the softness away from those areas. I'm bringing the detail back in by using my layer mask. So again, if I hold down my Alt or Option key, click on my layer mask, you can kind of see the areas that I'm working on to kind of get those things back. And again, I can continue to paint just to make sure that that's all nice and sharp in there. That I'm covering that softness filter up. Okay, you see the detail around her nose, so on and so forth. So I'm going to go all the way back out. So there's my after. There's my before. Again, it's a even though I did it kind of extreme, it's still pretty subtle. Okay. But and again, what I would probably end up doing is I'd probably end up lowering my opacity on this just a little bit. Now, the other thing here is that I would definitely work on is her hair. Again, hair has a lot of detail in it, so I want that detail back. So I'm going to go in here, and again, I'm just covering that area, that softened area up with my layer mask by painting black. Because what I'm also going to want to do is I'm also going to want to go back here, and I'm going to also I want to put a little bit of highlights in her hair. Okay, so that's probably pretty good. And I might take some out of her hands just a little bit too to kind of get some of the detail back in here. She's got pretty good hands, so I can bring some of that detail back. Ooh, let me go back here because I made it. Now here's a really good lesson, guys. I was painting directly on my high pass layer, and that is, I inadvertently selected it, so that's a big no-no. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back up here. I'm in my history panel, which is, if you note the history panel with Photoshop, you have one level of undo, one Control Z or Command Z on a Mac, but you do have a history panel. So I'm going to go back up here to this, and I need to make sure that I've selected my layer mask. So I did not do that. So I'm going to go back over her hair, painting again. And I'm going to bring my flow all the way up. Again, with black. So I apologize, and actually it's kind of a good lesson because you want to make sure that you definitely have your layer mask selected when you are doing these processes. Okay, and the only reason I noticed that was when I started painting on her hands. It's like that ended up going dark on me, so I was actually painting black on that high pass layer. So I again kind of get some of the detail back in her hands. There we go. Okay. And the detail back in her hair. And maybe even some of the detail in her ear as well. Because again, like I said, anybody who completely blurs stuff out, it's a huge mistake, to be quite honest with you. It's a huge mistake just to blur everything out because you lose so much. Okay, so again, if I click on my layer mask, I can kind of see where I've done things and kind of hit these other little spots. It's also a good way to make sure that you've hit all the spots you want to hit. So now I want to go ahead and lighten her hair. So again, I'm going to do my jump layer to combine everything. And again, like I said, everything down below here is all preserved. This is the best part about working in layers this way, because everything is preserved. So I'm going to call this highlights, and I didn't name these other two layers. I apologize. Highlight. And yes, I'm doing the cheating spelling of all this stuff. So again, if you remember, when I did my little niece, I used the blending mode of screen to brighten everything up, and then I grabbed and put a layer mask, took my white layer mask, inverted it to black. Okay, I'm going to paint with white, and again, I'm going to follow the flow of her hair when I do this. And again, you know, you can see this is like way over the top, way over the top. And that's fine, because again, I want to show you guys how you can kind of just sort of control this as you go. Now, if you notice, I've got this at 100%. Okay, if you look, I'm going to hold Alt and click on my layer mask. You can see at 100%, I'm not quite 100% white. I'm pretty close, but because of the pen pressure that I have available to me on my pen, I'm not painting pure white. It's a pretty light shade of gray, as you can see, but I'm not painting white. So now what I want to do is I'm going to take this, and I don't want this effect quite as strong, so I'm just going to drop my opacity, maybe around 30-ish%. So again, there's my after, there's my before, and just enough to bring those highlights out a little bit. Okay, so overall, if I hold down my Alt key and click on the eyeball on my background layer, there's my after, there's my before, there's after, and there's before. Okay, so the last thing, and again, this is kind of a personal taste thing. I can do a couple of things here. I'm going to show you a couple. If I want to get this a little bit more stylized, if I want to get colors to really kind of pop, there's a cool little trick that you can do that works really well. And basically what it is I'm going to take and I'm going to add a black and white adjustment layer. So again, I'm going to be up here in my adjustment layers, and I'm going to click on black and white. Okay. Now you see my whole picture goes black and white. Now, in the black and white adjustment layer inside of Photoshop, it's not just taking the color out, desaturating. I see a lot of people just desaturate, and they're going, oh, black and white. Black and white still works with your primary and your secondary colors. So you've got reds, yellows, greens, cyans, blues, and magentas that I can work with. So I know, for instance, like her lips are red. If I want to make her lips pop a little bit more, make them a little bit more contrasty, you can see if I move my red slider, I can make that a little bit more contrasty. Grab my yellow slider, maybe make that pop a little bit more. I don't have a lot of greens in here, so it doesn't really affect a whole lot there. Don't have too much in the way of cyans. She's got blue eyes, so it might affect her blue eyes just a little bit. And you can see hairs in reflected light, you can kind of see her hair lightening up just a touch. So I might want to go ahead and maybe give that a little bit more contrast. I don't think there's too many magentas in there. So I've made these adjustments. Now here's the cool part about this. Okay, again, going into my blending modes, if I come down here to my black and white layer and I go to my blending modes and I change this mode from normal to soft light, it gives it a really saturated and a little bit more of a depth to everything. So here's before, there's after. Okay, now I'm losing a couple of things, like I'm losing her eyes a little bit, and again, because of this black and white layer, I have a layer mask. So I want to bring her eyes back. I'm going to zoom into them. I'm on white. I want to paint with a black brush. Make it a little bit smaller. So I want to be able to see the, of course now my keyboard's not going to work here. So I'm just going to come over here, grab my size. There we go. Maybe a little bit smaller. I just clicked on my brush right up here and lowered the size. For some reason my keyboard shortcut's deciding it doesn't want to work out for me right now. So then I will come back in here because I like her blue eyes. I want to make sure that they're going to stand out. Okay. Control or Command 0 to take me back out. There's my after. There's my before. So you can go either way on this. It's up to you. This is kind of a taste thing, and usually when I do stuff that's a little bit more, that I want a little bit more high contrast, I did an extreme version of this particular technique on a photo shoot where I wanted it to sort of almost resemble a very oversaturated graphic novel look. So there's ways to combine these things and use these things in unusual and different ways. If I want to intensify this effect, I can grab this. I can go ahead and I can grab this layer. Oops, cancel that. Sorry. I can grab this layer and I can duplicate it. So I'm going to grab this. I'm going to drag it down here to duplicate it. Now watch what happens. It's probably going to be kind of weird. Not too bad. Actually, that looks kind of cool. So I can actually duplicate that layer and give it a different look. So here's without the top black and white layer. Here's without the second black and white layer. Okay, so that's the original minus the black and white layers with the soft light. And then what I can also do is I can take this black and white layer copy and I can change the blending mode on it to say something like luminosity. And it's just going to punch up the colors just a little bit more. You can kind of see, gives me a little bit more contrast, punches those little darker areas just a little bit more. So you can kind of play around with these things a little bit too and come up with different looks. Overlay, it's just a stronger version of soft light. So it gives you a little bit more of an extreme look. And then back to soft light. Or I can go ahead and trash that and go back to my single black and white. And again, if I think it's too much, I just come over here to my opacity slider, drop that down just a little bit to taste, and there you go. Now the very last thing I'll usually do on a photo, and again depending on what I'm doing, is I will add a simple vignette just to kind of darken up the edges a little bit. So if I hold down my Alt key and I go down here to my new layer icon, click on that once. On the Mac it's going to be Option. And I'm going to change the mode. This is one of these situations where I'll change my mode to Overlay. And then if you notice right here, and the reason I hold down Alt, all I'm doing is I'm creating a new layer, but when I hit Alt or Option, when I click on that new layer icon, it gives me this dialog box, and it allows me to do a couple of things here that I want to do, which is one, I want to change my blending mode to Overlay, and then the other is I want to fill this layer with 50% gray or neutral color. Okay, so when I do this, click on that, you can see that this new layer is a gray layer. Okay, so I'm going to come up over to my filter menu, and under lens correction, it takes a second for this to load. And the method might be slightly different if you're using an older version of Photoshop, but it should be under lens correction. And then I'm going to go under here under the Custom tab, and then I'm going to go down here under Vignette. Okay, and you've got two sections here. You've got Amount, and then you've got your midpoint. On your amount, you can either, if you go darken, it gives you a dark edge. If you go lighten, it gives you a wider edge. So if you've ever seen photos like with a white vignette, you would go towards the white. Now, again, I think I'm so used to doing this, I don't really watch the numbers. I kind of know by visually looking at the shot or this gray screen and seeing how things are going to fall. And I know approximately for me where my two arrows are going to sit. So once I do that, click OK. And you can see, and again, it's not a very harsh thing. It's a very subtle thing, but it draws your attention back into the picture. And again, if I think it's a little too much, I grab my opacity slider, drop it back just a touch. There's my after. There's my before. There's my after. Now overall, hold down my Alt key. There's my before. And there's my final. Okay? Any questions? Cool. Like I said, well, you can still type in questions if you want while I'm talking here. I can answer them for you. So like I said, the idea here is to work in a non-destructive environment. This way you are, you can always go back to the things that you started before, using this method or using this workflow. And again, this is my workflow in the way that I've done this and the way that I've built this whole thing. Again, my methods may be different. Obviously, my settings are going to be different depending on what I am working on. But my workflow is pretty much the same. I start with my touch-up, and then I will do levels adjustments or dodging and burning. And then I'll start building. I'll get the basics out of the way, and then I'll start building all the custom settings. So things like bringing out the lips, bringing out the eyes, bringing out the highlights in the hair, doing my skin softening. I will build up to those things, and then for me, my final is adding in my vignette. Actually, my final is adding in my logo, but as far as this goes, my final is adding in that vignette as my last step. So you can experiment with different things and different settings. Again, if I go back over here to my black and white layer, I can grab things. Now that it's color, I can grab things and start, you can see I can start adjusting other things to, again, change the look of that. So you're not limited. You're not limited just by the settings that you make and you're done. You can go back whenever you do an adjustment layer, and you can make an adjustment, additional adjustments, even after you're done. So it makes it really a real flexible workflow, and that's what you ultimately want. Is you want a really flexible workflow. So again, if you guys have any questions, I'm going to drop this so you can take a look at my email address again. There's my email address. If you guys have any questions or anything, please, again, feel free to drop me a line at illuminationclasses@gmail.com. Like I said, I'll be editing this thing and putting it together, and should have it up by no later than Sunday evening is usually my goal. So you can rewatch it. I will try to remember to post the link in all the different groups that I posted today's link in. So I will let you guys know when that's up and running. Like I said, you can start looking for it Sunday if you go to YouTube and you search Illumination Classes. You should be able to find my YouTube page. And if you could, support me, subscribe to it, and I'm going to probably start putting up some shorter tutorials as well as doing some more in-depth stuff like tonight. Get into a couple. I do want to get into a couple of different ways of doing, like dodging and burning, and a different way of doing a softening technique and touch-up and stuff. So I'll probably do another class like this maybe in a couple of weeks. I'll keep you guys informed. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I usually try to get back to everybody as quickly as possible, and try to answer your questions as best I can. If not, I'll let you know, and I will find the answer for you. So thank you guys for hanging in with me. Appreciate it. Hope you guys have a good night, and we will see you later. Thanks. Bye-bye.